Hello, everybody. We are just waiting to hit 10 a.m. Eastern to get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right. So it is officially 10 a.m. Eastern Time, or wherever you are in the world. It is the time of this webinar. Welcome to iMotions webinar series on software and hardware technologies for human behavior research. Next slide, please. Today, we are talking to Dr. Florian Eyben from our partner company, audEERING, about their work around voice analysis. The title of today's webinar series is Cracking the Vocal Code, Using Voice Analysis to Uncover Hidden Layers of Human Behavior. Our goal is for you to leave this session with more knowledge and skills around 1, why the voice is an important research tool. 2, how audEERING developed their algorithms to capture human vocal expressions. And 3, to learn more about the valuable integrations of voice analysis for a more in-depth understanding of human behavior. We welcome questions and comments. Please just add those into the Q&A, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. We will not look at the chat feature if that is something that pops up for you. Next slide, please. Now, before we get started, let's just clarify the audEERING and iMotions partnership. audEERING is a company located in Germany that develops API and SDK for voice analysis integration. They work directly with clients that need customized API and SDK solutions. iMotions, whom I represent, offers a user-friendly platform to conduct human behavior research using multiple sensor and AI technologies. And audEERING's voice analysis SDK is integrated into the iMotions platform. In other words, through iMotions, you can get access to audEERING's voice analysis capabilities, which we'll learn more about today. iMotions works with all sorts of clients within various industries and applications, including human factors, clinical research, marketing and sales, automotive testing, and development. If you're interested in conducting voice analysis research, your safest bet is to contact iMotions. We'd be happy to connect you with audEERING if your research needs a very customized solution. Now, going back to the topic of today, cracking the vocal code and uncovering hidden layers of human behavior. This is a big subject that iMotions is not just passionate about, but has been involved with for quite some time. Next slide, please. While voice analysis is a new module in the iMotions platform, iMotions has always been heavily invested in uncovering the unsaid. For example, through our facial expression analysis, researchers have leveraged AI to scrutinize how our faces convey emotions and meaning. Through our galvanic skin response module, researchers have been able to literally measure when something emotionally significant happens to a person. And with the electroencephalogram or EEG module, we have enabled researchers to measure how difficult it really is for people to solve a task. Next slide, please. However, along this journey, iMotions has always advocated for including self-reports, interviews, focus groups, and the likes. Not only does this inform us of people's conscious experience, but we also get a unique perspective into the feelings that may be expressed through their spoken voice, whether it's based on the words they're using or their tone of voice. The incorporation of audEERING's voice analysis algorithm elevates our ability to leverage people's voices to get even deeper insights into the human experience. Next slide, please. You can find iMotions offices and team members across the world, and I'm going to bet that no matter what country you currently reside in, you can find a leading university or company that currently leverages the iMotions software. Next slide, please. Our global reach is not just a result of wanderlust. It is caused by the universal need for researchers to collect high-quality data from multiple devices synchronously. When researchers are unable to do that, they can provide quantitative, objective, real-time data that is unaffected by bias. In combination with traditional research methods, such as self-reporting, the researchers are now positioned to conduct research faster, better, and with a greater impact. Next slide, please. As you'll hear more about shortly from Dr. Eyben, the iMotion system is, at its core, focused on streamlining the process of multimodal data collection and analysis. Whether you're looking to have an advanced setup in a car on the street or a simpler setup with a single desktop in a lab, iMotions is the system that will get you the data of the highest quality and reputability. Next slide, please. So, I am excited to introduce Dr. Florian Eyben. He is the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of audEERING. By training, Dr. Eyben is an electrical engineer and is an expert in the field of digital signal processing, speech and music analysis, and machine learning. While he was at the Technical University of Munich, he developed the first version of OpenSmile, which is now the world's leading open source toolkit to automatically and in real time analyze voice and music signals. To date, he has authored and co-authored over 150 peer-reviewed publications, and his research on automated speech and music analysis has been cited over 7,000 times. I'm going to let Dr. Eyben present his work, and we will end with questions and comments from all of you folks in the audience. Dr. Eyben, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Pernille. Thank you for the great introduction, and I'm very, very happy to speak today to all of you and tell you more about voice analysis. So let's look at the following animation. Although I'm speaking about voice, in this communication here, you can see from the gestures, from the facial expressions, from the smiles, what it's about, that it's in a positive mood, that there's surprises maybe in there. And this layer of communication we also have in speech. It's not just the words that we say, but it's how we express things. And that is a layer that audEERING and also iMotions through the voice analysis module can make accessible to researchers and also companies who want to integrate these technologies into products. So I am going to show you now a version of our very latest empathic conversational AI. So I'm sure many of you have worked with systems like Alexa or Siri or OpenAI's speech mode. But here is one where we can actually demonstrate that the tone in which we say something is important. And this is going to be kind of like the theme of this webinar, what you're going to learn more about, how this works and what this can be used for. Hello, I will give you a sentence and please say if it's sarcastic or not.
Sure, go ahead and share the sentence.
This is so great.
This doesn't sound sarcastic. It seems genuine with a positive tone.
This is so great.
This does sound sarcastic with low arousal and a less positive tone.
So you could see it was the same words, different tone, and the AI was able to respond based on tone information. So overall, emotion expression are derived from the Latin root to move. That means they drive our behavior. They make us move, which is very important if you're trying to understand why people are doing something, how people are expressing and behaving. Emotions are a very important part in there. There's one example. So how does this affect voice? When we smile, our voice changes because simply the resonance in our mouth that produces the sounds and the vowels and the phonemes that we utter, that changes through the smile. And that changes the way we sound. And that also can be perceived by the other end. Another example is disgust. It's a very obvious example. So you see it in the face. I mean, this face clearly looks disgusted. But also there's tension in our larynx and in our whole system of voice production. And that would reduce the resonance space. And that's tension we can hear. It alters the quality of the voice. And for example, our voice sounds higher pitched and strained and has less volume and depth in it. So overall, I've been talking about the sender now, but the communication that happens is something between sender and receiver. So we have a message to convey. We use our words, but we also use other channels, which we would call nonverbal cues. And that we would send over a channel, factual information, but also the relationship. How do I relate to the receiver and everything? What do I want to share plays a big role. Then I use all the modalities that I have available, and I then send the message to the receiver. However, the receiver has to interpret it and receive it in the right way. And that often, if there's a mismatch, leads to misunderstandings. And the fewer modalities we have, if we just use text in communication, we have much more misunderstandings that we're, for example, not able to catch irony or sarcasm, and then we don't understand the full intent of the message. So there's even researchers who have discovered that there are some sympathy or mirroring effects. So if somebody in the voice has tension or a crackling voice, then the listener might feel this. So that we start as a listener to clear our throat when we hear that the other person would actually be in need of clearing the throat or has a strained voice. Another study that some of you might know is from Merabian, very long ago already. He found out in experiments that for a very specific setting, so for some functional words or short phrases, the word that we're saying, something like great in the example in the beginning, is only very little information, but the body language, how we express it, and the tone play a vital role. So in this case, in this study, the tone alone was 38%. And of that information, the tone transmits 38% of our intent. The text, I think, only was 7% or something. And as you could see in the introductory example, the meaning of the text was only decipherable if we took the tone, how it was said, into account. So now, how does this affect, or how is this expressed in our voice? So some, for example, very important acoustic parameters are the pitch of our voice. Are we raising our voice? Are we lowering our voice? Or the way we use intonation. How do we emphasize certain words, or how do we vary our pitch throughout? Also, the loudness and the volume of the voice. So if we're whispering, if we're very silent, or if we really put emphasis, if we shout or scream even to the extreme. And of course, the speaking rate. If we're talking slowly and clear, or if we actually are in a hurry to express something, if we're talking quickly, or if we're mumbling and not expressing something perfectly. Our device technology from audEERING measures around 7,000 of such parameters that can be used. And a few of them we expose in the iMotions prosody module, but there's many more behind that can be used, for example, for machine learning applications and statistical applications, because not all of the 7,000 ones are explainable. So that's why we're not exposing all of them to be used individually. Now, what parts of the body or functions do have an influence on our voice? We like to put it in three categories. One basically is motor function. So anything that controls your muscles, your muscle control, the muscles itself, body posture, and the like. That affects how you speak. You remember in the beginning in the example with the smile, this is generated by movements of our muscles. Also the tension that we haven't discussed, that comes from motor functions. There's another aspect that's cognition, cognitive control. If we suffer from cognitive decline, we're not able to phrase coherent sentences, perhaps, or to speak the words that we want to send our message. And we might also lack other things like having an irregular speech rhythm, or have a different prosody and different parameters. So we might not be able to do intonation properly. And there are cues that would be related to cognitive decline, or maybe more interesting even for you, to cognitive load. So if we're doing two things at the same time, if we're speaking a foreign language, for example, we have an added cognitive load, and that reflects, or that results in the way we speak. And then, of course, there's physiological aspects from our blood, from our heart rate, breathing, that of course influence our voice. But also, I personally like to kind of phrase it in another way, that there's also a mental component. So if our emotions are wrong, or whatever drives us inside, that of course has an effect to our expression. So how do we measure all this in the voice? The emotion expressions are particularly results of our cognitive processes. So how do we react to a certain event? And basically, they create responses in our face, they create responses in our voice, in our autonomic nervous system, and they involve, for example, arousal. So if we hear that we have won in the lottery, for example, we definitely feel an urge to act quickly, to shout and scream, be happy or something, maybe, hopefully. Or even if it's not a positive event for us, we feel an urge to act because it is such a great news. And what we have implemented to interpret such expressions is two different models, because the description of such categories is very important. We have in machine learning and AI, there's a saying that basically everything that we can describe as humans in writing, we can also model with an AI model and build an AI to detect or model this. So in order to have any algorithm or AI interpreting emotion expressions, we have to be able to describe it. And the very basic model is using emotion categories. So expression categories like anger, happiness, neutral, and sadness. These are the very basic four that everybody can understand and know what is meant by it. However, there's a downside with this, that the world of expressions is very rich, and we cannot just put it into four categories. Take my speech now in the webinar. Is it neutral? Is it happy? It's certainly, hopefully, not angry or sad, but it's somewhere in between. It might be enthusiastic, or it might be interested. And there are so many words. There's several hundred terms across different languages and cultures that would actually describe emotions. So psychologists have come up with models how to unify this, and how to understand the underlying concepts of emotions and related expressions. So one of the most used ones is the arousal valence dominance model. And this is what we have also implemented, and what is accessible in the iMotions voice module and our device SDK. We can measure continuous values, so we don't have to pin it to one category, and we can give you a score of arousal, dominance, and valence, from which you can infer different names of expression categories, like surprised or excited, or you can treat it in different ways and interpret the results, which I will come to later. So what are these dimensions? Arousal differentiates the energy level, enthusiasm. So a passive versus active expression. High urgency, like screaming and shouting or panic, would be high arousal. But low arousal would be calmness, relaxation, or satisfaction. And it correlates, for example, with loudness, speaking rate, and also some variation of pitch. Dominance is the next one. That is the level of control we have in a situation. So, very simple example, anger and panic or fear are both high arousal and negative emotions. But in the case of anger, we are in control, at least of our perception of it. But in panic, we are not in control of the situation and we have to run away. So we're showing a low dominance in this case. Dominance also correlates with pitch and the pitch stability. So like a low-pitched male voice would signal more dominance, whereas a higher-pitched, fluctuating pitch voice would signal uncertainty. For valence, that is basically what you might also know more or less as sentiment. So it's something positive or something negative. And that also correlates a lot with the frequency information in pitch, but also with the way how we use pitch and also the timbre, how our voice in general sounds. So now I'm going to take you on a little journey through this arousal, valence, and dominance space.
Your emotional journey. Hello, you. I would like to invite you to a journey through your emotional world. We start in the neutral middle, somewhere between positive and negative valence. Slide to a higher activation, also called arousal, and a super positive valence. Woohoo! Now you can be super loud and use all your energy for your expression and a faster speaking rate. And then it only takes one change for you to recognize if it's still happy or already negative valence. Welcome to the land of anger. Very loud, hot anger. Also possible in a cold variant, much quieter. We leave this emotion, go farther down to lower arousal, and meet sadness. Low energy, less motivation, expressed in a slow and quiet voice. Thank you for sharing the emotional journey and welcome to Device.
So now that we know about these emotion expression concepts, let's again take a look at the acoustic parameters to understand what they relate to. So loudness, I have explained before that it's relevant. And we express this based on psychoacoustics. So it's kind of the energy level of the signal, but on the perceiving side. So that's why we put here weighted sum of intensities. And it simulates also our ear's ability to perceive different frequencies as different levels of loudness. So a more high-pitched tone around 3 kilohertz would be perceived as much louder than a very low pitch tone like 50 or 100 hertz that has the same physical energy. There's also pitch. That's the height of the sound, or the high pitch, low pitch voice, male, female voices, for example, differ. And this becomes lower with high arousal and with high dominance. Articulation rate, number of interpausal syllables per second. And that, for example, correlates with negative valence. So if we speak very fast, if we speak very rhythmic, then that is more perceived as negative often. And intonation we measure by pitch variations. So whether I speak with a lot of melody in my voice, or whether I speak very monotonous and very flat. And with that, I can deliver absolutely different meanings to my tone. Okay, we have now all the basics of vocal parameters that we can measure with signal processing algorithms. How do we describe expressions? But now, how do we build something that we can model these expressions? Because of all this complexity in the voice, we cannot just say if your pitch is high or low, you have a high or low arousal. Many people have different pitch, different levels of loudness, different sounds of their voice. So we have to find common patterns. And that is what we use machine learning for, especially supervised learning. So in supervised learning, you have a data set that consists of labeled data, that is audio samples, somebody speaking, and a label. And in the label, we then have arousal, valence, dominance, or also categories annotated by human listeners. Then we use statistical optimization methods to build a machine learning model that, with lowest possible error, predicts those labels again. In order to train that, first step is we need to build a database. And our task here, and what we've been very good at, and where we build a lot of knowledge, is the annotation of such vocal expressions. So listen to these samples. They are deliberately not in English. They're in a different language. Maybe some of you understand German, but if you don't, still try to listen to the tone and try to think what emotion could be expressed here.
Was sind das für Tüten, die da unter dem Tisch stehen?
And the second one.
An den Wochenenden bin ich jetzt immer nach Hause gefahren und habe Agnes besucht.
And the third.
Sie haben es gerade hochgetragen und jetzt gehen Sie wieder runter.
So the first one was discussed. The second one sounded similar, but could be discussed maybe. But I think more likely it was simply disinterest, boredom. And the last one was more happiness, surprise. So that already illustrates the difficulty of labeling, because there's no single ground truth. The opinions might differ, and there's a continuum of expressions. So we help our annotators by putting some visuals there, by asking several questions, and also by averaging over multiple people. So we have to get multiple opinions and get a majority consensus. Another important item is that we ensure that we have the right data when we train our models. And we put a lot of effort into actually reducing bias of a model and ensuring robustness and fairness of these models. Because if you have ever worked with machine learning, you have probably heard that models are biased, that they don't work well maybe for female speakers. When the first voice recognition, speech recognition models came out, they had issues that the accuracy was lower for female speakers because simply the people who built the system had put a lot of training data in there from male speakers. And these are things that we don't want such models to exhibit. And especially for expressions, we have to be sure that we include multiple languages, cultures, ethnicities, and people in a very, very diverse mix to make sure those models work in all those scenarios. So here's an example on the left side. This was like 2-3 years ago. Our state in the data sets, we also had more male than female data, and we had a lot of data with unknown labels. So we identified the problem, and then we optimized our data collection process to collect and annotate more samples of female speakers and also tag more of the samples by the perceived gender or by self-reported gender of subjects so that we can come to a more balanced set, as you can see on the right side. And this has actually led to a decrease in differences between predictions for male and female voices. So we're running rigorous tests in terms of fairness. And we're comparing, for example, on a larger set of neutral emotional expressions to run our models for male speakers, female speakers, take the average, and of course they should be the same. They should be around 0 on average. And we can see that the differences between the two groups are very small, and they're smaller than 0.06 on average, which is a great result already. We have a whole scale of -1 to +1, so that's where this has to be taken into context. We do the same for cultures. We take languages from different cultures, different areas of the world, and we look at the accuracy of predicting those 4 emotion categories: anger, happiness, neutral, sadness. And then we see that there are differences. We have to acknowledge that. So this is also something you have to consider if you're using the tools on a rare language. Then it might not work as accurate as for English, German, or languages that we've seen more in the training. And you find more information on this also in the white paper and here on the slides. Also, for the arousal valence models, we compare the influence of language by looking at the distributions. So we take the Mozilla Common Voice dataset, which is a large multilingual dataset where people are reading sentences, reading text. And we can see that the mean value of the prediction shifts only up to 4% between the languages. And that is also very good. The last thing, of course, that's very important is the accuracy. So what everybody, when talking about AI and machine learning, they ask, what is the accuracy? But for us, this is only one metric, which is, of course, very important. But we have all the other metrics of fairness also that we have tested for before we release the models into production. Now, how do we measure the accuracy for this more complex topic of expression prediction? For the categories, for the 4 classes, it's typical accuracy. How many % of the labels did you get correct? But for the arousal, valence, and dominance dimensions, we measure it as correlation value. And in particular, we use concordance correlation coefficient because this reflects both the correlation quantitatively and the error. So if you're making a high error, so your scaling is off, your concordance correlation coefficient will still be lower. And then we compare to human references. So we take one human being and compare it against the rest of the annotator. And that gives us our human performance. And we can see that for arousal, valence, and dominance, we are approximately on human level, sometimes above, sometimes a bit below, but we're within the range of fluctuation of other humans within this panel, for example. And that means we can say the expression analysis automated is on human level. We also have another module in there for age and gender prediction. Gender is basically the perceived gender. So does it sound like a male or female voice? It does not assume what a person assumes about their gender. That's not our intent here. And for the age, we have an accuracy mean absolute error of 8.3 years, whereas a human just listening to the audio sample would get around 10 years. So also here, we are on par with human perception performance. Now, I'm coming to another area of use for voice analysis, and that is a very interesting field, especially in research, vocal biomarkers. So, as you know, and as you probably could sense from before what I said about cognitive function and other parts that would affect the voice, diseases also affect how we speak. The most obvious is if you have a cold, your voice sounds different. But also for other things like stress or depression, even momentarily or chronic long-term, you sound different. So probably you've experienced it. Somebody calls you on the phone, a person that you know, that you're close with, and they sound different, and you notice it. And this is what vocal biomarkers are also about. We did a study with Parkinson's patients, and you can see the differences in the spectrogram. So at the top, the pitch is much more stable and flat. And at the bottom, there's more fluctuations. This is the spectrogram of a person saying, ah, sustained. Oops. We did another study on multiple sclerosis, and we also had very interesting findings that patients with mild and beginning symptoms of multiple sclerosis, they sound more monotonous, they have lower energy in their voice, and they speak a bit slower due to added cognitive load, more thinking while they are speaking. And also we see a more breathy voice quality, so more whispered. They have more trouble controlling the muscles that are responsible for the articulation. Now that we know what we can do about vocal expressions and about the about the vocal biomarkers, let's take a look how voice analysis can be seen in the context of other modalities that iMotions offers. I always say the more modalities you put in, the better you can analyze humans and the better you can analyze human behavior, because our biology, our physiology, the way we interact, it's multimodal. We don't say we only do voice. This has just come with technology, that we have a phone where there's only a voice channel. So multiple modalities can strengthen the results. So if face and voice agree, you kind of get a better sense of what's going on. Some modalities might also disagree on purpose. If we're using irony or sarcasm, maybe the text doesn't match our tone, or we express something different in the face while saying something else. Also, simply not all of the modalities would work for everything. So if you look at more GSR or EEG, you're looking more into the person, saying what is their subconscious physiological response to a stimuli. If you look at face and voice, you're looking more at what are they consciously, to some degree, expressing. Of course, some facial movements can also be unconscious, involuntary, automated responses, but these you can control much more than your heart rate, your skin conductivity, or even your EEG. And also not all modalities can be used at the same time. So they complement each other, because while you are speaking and moving, EEG is very bad. But when you are only viewing something on a screen and sitting still, EEG is perfect, but you cannot use speech or voice analysis because simply there's no speech. And also you might have different modalities that can measure the same thing, but one modality might be more accurate than the other. For example, measurement of dominance and arousal does not work so well in video, whereas valence, through smiles or disgust or something in the facial expression, is very well measurable there. So combining modalities is always good. And we have a few other items here as a checklist. You will get the full checklist in the follow-up mailing that you can go through to check where is voice analytics applicable? Should I use it in my projects? And of course, the most important question is, are you already having voice recordings in your process? Are people speaking? If people are not speaking, you don't need voice analytics. But if you have recordings already, or if people are speaking and you're not recording it, then you should do this to add another modality to make better decisions. And last but not least, I'm going to show you 3 cases, what we have done and where we have applied this technology. So Jabra, a company who makes contact center headsets, speakerphones, maybe you've come across them. They have created the product called Engage AI, which is being used in contact centers to provide the agents a mirror for the voice. As you can see on the image, they get some green, yellow, whatever feedback as towards if they're speaking friendly or unfriendly, disengaged. And that helps them do their job better, sound more friendly, and in the end, give a better feeling to the customers. For this, we have done all the development from annotating training data, building a dedicated solution for them here. And we really received great feedback by the clients and also the end users, the agents themselves. Another example is that we're doing on our own AI Sound Lab platform a respiratory health study. So we collected samples of people with respiratory issues and from healthy participants, and we can now give a score of your respiratory health. So do you sound healthy or do you sound like having a cold or creaky voice? For that, there's some prompts that you have to speak. You have to cough, you have to read, say vowels, and then you would see some results like your speech rate, voice and control, or your overall respiratory health and vocal strength. Now, there are a few samples of the prompts that people have been doing. I'm just going to play them here. So this is a sustained vowel where you can really also infer a lot about the voice and the clarity of the voice. This was coughing with a bit of noise from the microphone. So these are things that we have to deal with in practice. And the last one.
Einst stritten sich Nordwind und Sonne, wer von ihnen beiden wohl der Stärkere wäre, als ein Wanderer, der in einen warmen Mantel gehüllt war, des Weges daherkam.
So this was a typical passage of a red speech, the North Wind and Sun, that is commonly used in studies. So if you're interested in this one, might be something to adopt in your own research, to follow such a short protocol of recording, because that gives you a baseline, and all of these would measure different aspects of the voice. So from the sustained vowel, you can read other information than from basically the red speech. And the last one is a case study on market research. So we've had the task that there was an interview with a panel of people, around 30 people, testing different concepts of new products. They were talking in a very informal setting with an interviewer moderating the discussion about the concepts and products. Then there was an analysis on the textual level. There were questionnaires handed out, and we took the speech of all the individual participants, labeled them with sections where they were talking about each concept, and then computed the average arousal and valence values for each of these concepts. And then you can create a map like you can see here on the left, where you see that concept A has the highest response in arousal. And that indicates that this topic was more relevant for the people discussing there as concept E, which was also negative, but also created less participation. So it did not concern the people so much, was not relevant to them. You do see very small differences here. So don't expect to see one at 0.5 and the other one at minus 0.5. But there's small differences. Look at statistical significance with your N, and then if it's significant, it does have a valid meaning. So to conclude, the dimensional expression model and also the individual features like pitch and loudness in the prosody module are very powerful because they give you continuous outputs and they give you something that you can work with an average over a different group or a panel. So, but also within an individual, look for relative changes within the subject over time. So we cannot say that an arousal value of 0.2 or minus 0.2 would be good for anything particular. But if the arousal value drops within a study, within a participant, over stimuli or over different tasks, that certainly has a meaning. And if you're looking for differences on the absolute scale between groups, like I explained in market research, look for aggregate differences. Take something like 10 to 20 subjects as a minimum, about 100 utterances in total per group or per label, like a concept or product. And even if they're small, they are meaningful. You might also think about calibrating. So reading neutral text like the North Wind and Sun, that you would reset the origin, the 0 point of the arousal valence dominance space. And you can calibrate also on all the samples that somebody has spoken if you feel that these samples would be really like, positive, negative, neutral, balanced. And also put the calibration report at more points, beginning, middle, and end of the study to ensure that not at the beginning all the participants are nervous or at the end they are tired or something. Place them at 3 points, then you have the best calibration data that you can have. And with that, I conclude the webinar and hope you have a lot of comments. And I also hope you have learned a lot about vocal analysis, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any further questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eyben. This was very insightful. I know I have learned a lot. We have received and we continue receiving a lot of questions. I'll start asking the questions from the audience now. Everyone, please type in your questions in the Q&A if you haven't yet. In parallel, I'm going to launch a very short poll that gives you an opportunity to easily connect with iMotions and audEERING. But let me take the first question first. One of the things that a lot of people have asked about is culture. So I'm just going to ask one of the questions here. How does this module handle cultural and linguistic variations in tone and emotion, especially when certain languages or accents may naturally sound different, like Russian sometimes sounding intense or even angry when actually neutral? Are there adjustments to ensure accurate interpretations across different languages?
Absolutely. So that's a very, very good question and very good point. Um, the perception of different languages also depends on the culture of the perceiving person. So, as I mentioned before, we're including training data for the model from many, many different cultural backgrounds, different languages that are labeled by different people from different backgrounds. So, the majority, of course, is focused on English-speaking countries, European countries at the moment, but we are continuously improving that model towards also including different perceptions. So can say that at some point we will have support for something to say not only what is the arousal valence dominance value of this sample, but what is the arousal valence dominance value that a Western, English, European speaker might assign versus what does a Russian, Chinese, or African speaker assign, and then even breaking it further down. But for now, we ensure it by including data from multiple languages and labeling them according to the perception of the average listener.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question. As Gen AI and GANs are getting better, does the software or is the software able to identify when the voices are AI generated or fake? And can AI generated voices be used to train the software such that you are able to control the nuances of generated AI voices?
Sure, I think that's a valid question. The software that we provide is not made for detecting if a voice is fake or not. There's other technologies and software out there that is designed specifically for this. But of course, the algorithms that we employ to measure over 7,000 parameters from the signal and do machine learning on it, they can be used to build a model for fake voice detection. As to the second point of the question, they um, fake voices or fake voices, synthesized voices can of course be used in the training process or also in the adaptation process of the model. So if you want to have a very accurate assessment for a very specific task to get better nuances in some way, you can simulate this. That is a valid point to do and to include in a training pipeline, of course.
Awesome. Next question is from Katrin. She says, "Hi, the valence, arousal, and dominance model is pretty clear to me, but I have a question about the emotional categories. And on what basis or theory did audEERING choose the emotional categories of sad, angry, happy, and neutral? Why does audEERING only focus on these four emotions and not, for example, on surprise, fear, or disgust?"
Right. There's a reason for it. So there's two reasons for it. So they do come from Ekman's Basic Six, where we have reduced it, where we have removed surprise, fear, disgust, actually. And neutral is not seen as one of the emotions there. So we're taking the other three. But as we find the arousal valence dominance model to be much much more powerful, we have decided to not include more categories into the categorical model. As the labeling also in terms of individual categories is very difficult, as I mentioned before. So it's very hard to find speech that is exactly only disgust or exactly only surprise. That's why we put our focus on the continuous and dimensional model. But we decided to offer this categorical model as a very basic step into it, because many people can relate to what anger, sadness, and happiness means. And also in some interactive applications, those are emotions that, of course, play a role. For example, for a voice assistant, these would be relevant.
Awesome. Thank you. Then we have a few questions about the setup. So I'm going to just ask one of them. Yuli says, thank you for the presentation. What are the requirements for the recording setup if I want to use the voice analysis? For instance, would a regular office space, such as a quiet room, even with some background noise from another room, or a Zoom recording without a special microphone be sufficient to obtain a good voice sample for analysis?
That's very good. I did not talk about that yet. Very good question. Thanks for asking. So overall, a decent quality of the recording is sufficient. We do not require professional setup, professional microphones, studio quality, because we also train the algorithms on everyday data. That means podcasts, recordings with background noise. So we deliberately also add background noise to make it robust to such influence. However, if you have a lot of background noise, especially speech in the background, then the quality and the accuracy degrades. So you can use a microphone, like a built-in microphone of a smartphone, of a tablet, that's decent. My rule of thumb is always listen to the recording. If you can clearly hear the speech and understand it, and do not hear too much background noise or echo, reverb, anything strange in there, or it sounds distorted or clipped, or very, very low volume, that's perfect. Listen to it if it sounds, hopefully, like my voice now in webinar. That's perfectly fine. And even if you have a fan or some background noise, anything stationary background noise is not an issue. If you have people talking and you can hear the talking loud and clear next to it, that is an issue.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question that kind of goes into the more logistical aspects here, but in this case about security. Could you explain how collecting public voice data aligns with privacy regulations, particularly in terms of GDPR compliance in the EU and UK? Specifically, what measures are necessary to ensure data privacy and consent?
Of course, data privacy is very, very important. So if you want to collect public voice data, or if you want to privately collect your own database, you always have to adhere to GDPR. So I'm not going to go too much on the legal side, but GDPR, the basic concept is that you need a legal reason to process the data. And one of them is consent of the subjects, or other reasons, for example, include that there is a special situation like a pandemic or something that we have to use some data to avoid that there's some danger coming up, or that there's another reason that we have to process the data for fulfilling some business needs or something. And of course, for public data, you always have to check the licenses. So if somebody publishes data for free use, for example, with a Creative Commons license, that implies their consent for that data to be used in the public domain. But if the license is more restrictive of the public data, then of course you cannot use it for any purpose, or you might only use it for the purpose specified in the license from the person giving you the data. And when you record your own data and do your studies, the means that 99% of the time you probably would use, or even 100%, is getting the right consent for the right purpose from the subjects and making them understand what you're doing. I think transparency is very important in these aspects. And one last thing I'd like to add to the question, because it always comes up and there's a lot of concern out there. There's public data on YouTube and so on, and now some companies are using it for training AI. I personally believe that there's two things we have to differentiate. One is generative AI, where you have a voice dialogue that is now being used to train a generative model that can create potentially your voice or things you said, recreate that, which I think is a high danger, because your own voice could be used, or things that you have said are now part of this model. Whereas the other side is discriminative models. This is what we're doing with voice analysis, for example, where a model learns from speech data to assign a label, like arousal valence dominance, for it. In these models, there's no such risk as to recreating some of the content for the subjects particularly.
Thank you. All right, we have lots more questions. Everybody, I'm doing my best to find some common themes here. One question that's coming up from a few people is what happens when an audio file contains two speakers, or when you have a scenario with two people talking? Can the system differentiate between them and provide results for the speakers separately?
At the moment, not, but we're working on this.
All right. Okay. That was the quickest answer yet. I like this question. How does this system compare to lie detector and polygraph tests? Can we reveal truth from voice analysis?
I like that one. It comes every time. Um, how does it compare to a polygraph? Basically, the polygraph measures things like GSR and other parameters, right? And then tries to make a decision if you're lying or not lying, I guess. I'm not so familiar with polygraphs in detail. But I think there are some people out there that claim they can detect truth or lie from voice. There has also been some scandals, companies really selling software to governments claiming they can do it. It was scientifically validated that they were at chance level for that. But they tried to hold back these publications and everything. So that's a bit of a topic out there. And I think there are also where we have participated studies on detecting deceptive speech. There's at the Interspeech Conference, for example, every year a challenge called Computational Paralinguistics Challenge, where this is being evaluated. But to come to an answer, the answer is simply you can find symptoms of lying, maybe, so that somebody is nervous, that somebody varies their emotional expression more, so that the levels of arousal are high and low. That might also be signs of cognitive load. So you have to think about something that you're making up while lying. So there are cues to it, but there's no such detector that can say lie or no lie, because it depends so much on the context. You could simply be nervous because of the situation. You could be thinking because it's hard for you to speak in public, or it's simply hard for you to remember all the facts that you're saying. So you could measure the symptoms, but the decision about lie or not lie would have to be made in the end by a human who takes all these factors into account. I'm not saying that not someday we can build a multimodal system that could do it, but with the current technology, you cannot detect lies.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. There's also a lot of people asking questions about mental health specifically. One question that just came in and aligns with a few other questions is what happens when somebody has a mental health challenge? For example, sociopaths may be very good at deception. They have a flat emotional affect. People with depression may not even be able to recognize different types of tones of voices or like emotions. Is your model able to discriminate and kind of detect those sorts of people?
Not that the model would output a certain label for mental health or something. But of course, as we are measuring emotional expressions, you could use this information exactly as you outlined in the question to say some people might be more flat on their emotional responses, or even better, in an interaction, you would see, because you know the context, so you're presenting a stimulus that's clearly happy, and you see that the person that the stimulus is presented to is not mirroring it. So they're not mirroring that tone in their voice. So somebody highly aroused saying, "Hey, how are you doing today?" And you just go, "Oh, I'm doing great." If you see that contrast in that context, that of course can tell you something. But just alone from a single segment of speech, which by the way is the unit of analysis that we do. So a few seconds, a sentence or a sub-sentence, that's what we give you a label for. But these numbers you need to interpret in the whole picture of your study design, your setup, and the interaction. And then yes, then you could potentially draw some conclusions depending on your study design.
Awesome. There's also a lot of questions around some of audEERING's work, well, OpenSmile being open source and audEERING being a company, and then figuring out how do we actually cite the work of audEERING if we were to use audEERING's voice analysis module. Are there specific publications that you recommend people look to? I know we're going to have two in a few slides. So could you speak to that? Where can they find the best resources? Is that on your website? Are there specific titles you would like to point out to them?
Absolutely. So
Sorry.
if you are using the iMotions module or if you're using the device SDK in your research, I think the best way for now is to mention in your acknowledgement section or in your citations a reference to audEERING device technology or link to our website of the product. If you are using OpenSmile or any of our research tools that are out there, then there are papers. So for OpenSmile, there's on our website for OpenSmile, you find the papers to cite for it. So that's an academic reference, papers that we published at academic conferences for it. Those you can use, of course, there too. And also the white paper that is coming to our website and that you've seen that can be used there too.
All right. Okay. So we are running right on the minute here. I got lost in all of the questions. Florian, do you mind just going to, I think, 2 slides ahead?
Absolutely. I can go there. Wait.
So here we have some extra resources. Just you can go one more slide. Awesome. Okay, so on this slide, we have a lot of resources. Several of you guys did ask about whether voice analysis is integrated into iMotions. Yes, it is. Reach out to iMotions for that. If you go to iMotions website, you'll be able to request a live demo of the platform. You'll also be able to see what it looks like. Some of you had questions about the interface. You can see that there for free. You can inquire more about specific products or pricing and educate yourself by reading our blogs and guides. I am a bit biased here since I wrote many of our pocket guides, but they really provide a wealth of information, including on voice analysis, that's relevant both to the brand new and seasoned scientists out there. You can also learn more about audEERING on their website, www.audEERING.com, and you can, of course, reach them via email. At the top of this page, you can find some of the resources that we think are particularly relevant for today's session, including 2 papers that are currently available on arXiv and audEERING's brand new white paper, which you will receive within the next 24 hours or so in your email as well. Again, I'd like to thank Dr. Eyben for joining us today, and I would like to thank all of you for participating. Make sure to sign up for our newsletter if you haven't already. We will make sure to do that if you said yes in the poll. And there you will learn more about what iMotions is up to, who we're working with, and the newest updates on biosensor technology and research. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.